I found old VHS tapes in my family's basement with my name on them, and I finally watched one. The detective placed the photo on the table between us, and I stared at a face I'd never seen before. "That's you," she said. "Your real name is Ethan Reeves. You were 3 years old when you disappeared from a grocery store in Portland. That was 26 years ago." I looked at the picture again, at the blonde toddler with my exact birthmark on his left wrist, and felt my entire life crack down the middle like glass. Because I was staring at myself, but I had no memory of this child, this place, or the desperate-looking woman holding his hand in the photo. The woman the detective identified as my biological mother. The mother I'd never known existed because the people I'd called mom and dad my entire life had been lying to me since before I could form complete sentences. I'd found the tapes 3 weeks earlier while helping my father clean out the basement of our childhood home in suburban Cleveland. He was selling the house after my mother died 6 months prior, and the grief had finally motivated him to tackle the decades of accumulated junk. I was 30 years old, working as an accountant, and I'd taken the week off to help him sort through old furniture and boxes of forgotten Christmas decorations. We'd been at it for 2 days when I found a plastic storage container shoved behind the furnace, covered in dust, thick enough to write your name in. Inside were 12 VHS tapes in unmarked sleeves, and someone had written dates on the spines in faded marker. October 1998 through March 2001. Below each date, in the same handwriting, was a single name written in capital letters. My name. Daniel. My father was upstairs when I found them, arguing with the real estate agent about staging recommendations. I pulled out the first tape and turned it over in my hands. The plastic case was old and slightly warped, the kind of tape you'd buy in a 3-pack at Walmart in the 90s. The date read October 1998, which would have made me around 3 years old. I couldn't imagine why anyone would have recorded me at that age, or why these tapes had been hidden behind a furnace for over 20 years. My parents had never been the type to document everything. We had maybe 3 photo albums total from my entire childhood, and I'd certainly never seen home movies. The whole thing felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, like finding a door in your house you'd never noticed before. I called down to my father that I was taking a break and carried the box upstairs to my old bedroom. The house still had my parents' ancient TV VCR combo in the guest room, one of those heavy wooden cabinet models from the early 2000s that doubled as furniture. I hooked it up, half expecting the thing not to work after sitting unused for years. The tape slid in with a dusty click, and after a few seconds of static, an image appeared on the screen. It was grainy, the quality you'd expect from a camcorder from that era, but clear enough. A small room with institutional beige walls and a single window with bars on it. A child's table with 2 plastic chairs, and sitting in one of those chairs, playing with wooden blocks, was a little boy I recognized from exactly 3 photographs in our family albums. The little boy was me. But something was immediately off about the footage. The room didn't look like our house, or any house. It looked clinical, almost like a hospital or a school. The child, me, was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, a striped shirt I'd never seen in any family photo. I watched myself stack the blocks methodically, my face eerily blank. There was no sound, just the hiss of magnetic tape. After about 2 minutes, a woman entered the frame. Not my mother. This woman was younger, maybe late 20s, with short dark hair and wearing what looked like business casual clothing. She sat down across from little me and started talking, though I couldn't hear what she was saying. The child looked up at her but didn't respond, didn't smile, didn't react at all. The woman pulled out a stack of cards and held them up one at a time. Even through the grainy footage, I could tell they were pictures of people. The child, tiny me, looked at each card with that same blank expression. Sometimes he would shake his head no. Sometimes he would point at the card. The woman would write something down on a notepad after each response. This continued for maybe 10 minutes before the tape cut to static. I sat there staring at the white noise on the screen, my heart doing something strange in my chest. The whole thing felt like watching a stranger. I had no memory of that room, that woman, or those cards. No memory of whatever test or evaluation this clearly was. And the expression on that child's face haunted me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't the face of a happy 3-year-old. It was the face of someone much older, trapped in a small body, going through motions they didn't understand. I should have stopped there, should have taken the tapes directly to my father and demanded an explanation. Instead, I loaded the second tape, dated December 1998. Same room, same setup, but this time the boy, me, was sitting at a table with paper and crayons. A different woman was in the room now, older, wearing a white coat like a doctor or therapist. She was showing the child photographs and asking him to draw what he saw. I watched myself carefully color in shapes, my small hands gripping the crayons with intense concentration. At one point, the woman held up a photograph of 2 adults, a man and a woman. The child stared at it for a long time, then pushed the photo away and shook his head violently. The woman in the white coat wrote something down, and her expression was one I recognized from work, from meetings where someone's trying to hide their concern behind professional composure. Something was very wrong in that room. I went through 4 more tapes that afternoon. Each one showed similar scenarios. Me in that same beige room, sometimes alone, sometimes with different adults, always being evaluated or tested in some way. In one tape from May 1999, a man in a police uniform came into the room and sat down with the child. He showed the boy a badge, spoke gently, and at one point, the child started crying silently, tears running down his small face, while his expression remained eerily neutral. In another tape from November 1999, there were two adults I didn't recognize, a man and a woman, sitting nervously on folding chairs while the child played in the corner. They never approached him. They just watched from across the room, the woman covering her mouth like she was trying not to cry. The man kept looking at the door like he wanted to leave. The dates on the tapes ran from October 1998 to March 2001, when I would have been between 3 and 6 years old. But I had no memories from that period of my life that matched these recordings. My earliest clear memories started around kindergarten, age 5, and they were all normal suburban childhood stuff. Playing in our backyard, learning to ride a bike, my mother making pancakes on Sunday mornings. Nothing that involved sterile rooms with barred windows and adults in white coats administering tests. I pulled out our old family photo albums from the hallway closet and flipped through them with new eyes. The few pictures of me as a toddler showed a happy kid in normal settings. Birthday parties, a trip to the zoo, Christmas mornings, but none before age 4. Not a single photograph of me as an infant or toddler younger than 3. I'd never thought about it before, but now it glared at me like a neon sign. My father came upstairs around 6 p.m. and found me surrounded by VHS tapes and photo albums, the TV still showing static. He froze in the doorway, and I watched his face go through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and something that looked a lot like fear. "Where did you find those?" he asked, and his voice came out hoarse, like he'd been the one crying. I told him about the box behind the furnace, and he actually swayed on his feet, gripping the doorframe for support. "Danny," he said, using my childhood nickname in a tone I'd never heard from him before. "You weren't supposed to find those. Ever." That's when I knew this wasn't just some weird forgotten home movies. This was something they'd deliberately hidden, something they'd hoped would stay buried in that basement forever. I asked him what was on the tapes, even though I'd already watched 6 of them. I wanted to hear him say it, needed him to explain why there was footage of me as a toddler in what looked like a psychiatric facility or police station, being evaluated by strangers, looking traumatized. My father sat down on the edge of my old bed and put his face in his hands. He sat like that for maybe 2 minutes, not speaking, while I waited with my pulse hammering in my ears. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red. "Those tapes are from the transition period," he said. "When you first came to live with us. We were told to document everything in case there were legal challenges later, in case anyone tried to take you away from us." The words didn't make sense strung together like that. Transition period. Came to live with us, like I was a foster child or an adoption, but I wasn't. They were my parents, or so I'd believed my entire life. "What do you mean, came to live with you?" I asked, and my voice sounded distant in my own ears. My father looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between love and grief, and guilt so intense it was almost visible in the air between us. "We're not your biological parents, Danny," he said. "Your mother and I, we adopted you when you were 3 years old. It was a private arrangement. We thought we were doing the right thing, giving you a better life. We thought the less you knew about where you came from, the easier it would be for you to move forward, to be happy. We were wrong." The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just me losing my balance while sitting down. Adopted. I was adopted. And they'd never told me. 30 years of birthday dinners and father-son fishing trips and Mother's Day cards, and it had all been built on a lie so fundamental, it rewrote my entire history. I asked him why the people on the tapes looked like police and doctors, why the room had bars on the windows, why that little boy looked so shut down and traumatized. My father's hands were shaking now, and he laced his fingers together to hide it. "Your biological mother had problems," he said carefully. "Drug problems, mental health issues. Child Protective Services removed you from her care when you were 2. You spent about a year in the system before we got the call about a toddler who needed a home. The tapes show the evaluation period after we were matched with you. They were making sure you were healthy, that you could attach to new caregivers, that the trauma hadn't damaged you beyond repair. That's what all those tests were. Attachment assessments, trauma evaluations, memory work. We kept the tapes because the caseworker said we might need them later if there were custody disputes. But there never were. Your biological mother signed away her rights. We finalized the adoption when you were 4, and we wanted you to have a normal life. We didn't want you growing up knowing you'd been abandoned and neglected. We thought we were protecting you. The thing about finding out your entire identity is a lie is that your brain doesn't process it all at once. It comes in waves. The first wave was disbelief, the certainty that my father was confused or mistaken or having some kind of grief-induced breakdown after losing my mother. The second wave was anger, hot and sharp, at the audacity of keeping something this massive from me for 3 decades. The third wave was a dizzying sense of unreality, like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else from very far away. I asked him how he could possibly justify this, how he could look me in the face every day for 30 years and maintain such an enormous lie. He started crying then, really crying, and said that after a while it stopped feeling like a lie. I became their son. The paperwork said so. My birth certificate said so. Everything legal and official said so. They'd simply chosen to let me believe the legal reality was also the biological one. I left the house that night without another word to my father, drove to my apartment across town and sat in my car for an hour before I could make myself go inside. I lived alone, had been dating someone casually for a few months but nothing serious, had a job I was moderately good at, and friends I saw occasionally for drinks. Normal 30-year-old stuff. Except now everything felt staged, like I'd been living in a play without realizing it, following a script someone else wrote. I called in sick to work the next day and spent 8 hours on my laptop researching adoption records in Ohio. It turned out that adoption records in this state were sealed unless you petitioned the court, which required proving you had a legitimate reason to access them. I had the original tapes, which meant I had dates and possibly case numbers visible in the footage. I went through each tape again, this time taking screenshots of anything that might be identifying information. In the background of several shots, I could see papers on desks with partial letterheads visible. One showed part of what looked like an official seal. Another showed a case file number, 98-CH-4721. I hired a private investigator the following week, a woman named Rebecca Lawson, who specialized in adoption searches and had good reviews for discretion. I met her at a coffee shop downtown and showed her the screenshots from the tapes. She looked at them for a long time, then looked at me with an expression I was starting to recognize. Pity mixed with professional concern. "This isn't a standard adoption case," she said. "These look like forensic interview rooms, the kind they use for child abuse investigations or custody disputes. The people in these videos aren't social workers, they're specialists. See this woman here?" She pointed to one screenshot showing the woman in the white coat. "That badge on her lanyard is from the forensic psychology unit at Cleveland Metro Hospital. They only get involved in serious cases. Abuse, neglect, potential crimes against children. Whatever happened to you before the adoption, it wasn't just about a struggling single mother. This was a legal case, probably criminal." Rebecca took the case and went to work. She had connections with the county clerk's office and knew how to navigate sealed records. It took her 2 weeks, but she came back with a file that changed everything I thought I knew about my life. We met at her office this time, and she laid out documents on her desk like she was presenting evidence in court. "Your legal name is Daniel Marcus Thorne," she said. "Born January 15, 1995 in Cleveland. That part is true. But Daniel Marcus Thorne didn't exist before March 1998. That's when your adoptive parents, Robert and Linda Thorne, legally changed your name. Before that, you were Ethan Charles Reeves. You were born to Catherine Ann Reeves in Portland, Oregon, in January 1995. And you were reported missing from a grocery store parking lot in June 1997 when you were 2.5 years old. The case was never solved. Until now, apparently." I couldn't breathe. The coffee shop air conditioning was too cold, and Rebecca's office was too warm, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I picked up the document she'd slid across the desk. It was a missing persons report from the Portland Police Department, dated June 8, 1997. Case number 97-MP-0412. Missing child, Ethan Charles Reeves, age 2 years, 5 months. Blonde hair, blue eyes, distinctive birthmark on left wrist. Last seen with mother, Catherine Reeves, age 24, in the parking lot of Safeway on Northeast Sandy Boulevard. Security footage showed Catherine Reeves entering the store with her son in a shopping cart. Footage showed her exiting the store 20 minutes later alone, visibly distressed, running through the parking lot calling his name. The child was never found. Catherine Reeves was investigated extensively, but never charged. The case remained open. Status: endangered missing child. "That's you," Rebecca said, pointing to the birthmark description. "Same unusual shape, same location. I compared it to your driver's license photo. It matches. You have a strawberry-shaped birthmark on your left inner wrist. Ethan Reeves had the same mark. Same birthday, same physical description, same unique identifying feature. Daniel, you weren't adopted through proper channels. You were a missing child who somehow ended up in the Ohio foster system under a different name. Your adoptive parents either knew and didn't care, or they were lied to by whoever placed you with them. Either way, this is a criminal case. This is kidnapping, identity fraud, and possibly human trafficking. You need to go to the police. Today." Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly as she organized the documents. This was beyond her pay grade, and she knew it. This was federal. I sat in her office for another hour, reading through everything she'd compiled. There were newspaper articles about my disappearance, about the desperate search efforts, about Catherine Reeves being investigated and then cleared by police. There were photos of me as a toddler, matching the ones on the VHS tapes but in different contexts. Me on a playground. Me at a birthday party with a cake that said Ethan 2 in blue frosting. Me being held by a young woman who I now knew was my actual mother, both of us smiling at the camera like we had no idea what was coming. Rebecca had also found a more recent article from 6 months ago, an obituary. Catherine Ann Reeves, age 51, died peacefully surrounded by family after a long battle with cancer. Survived by her sister, Janet, and nephew, Aaron. No mention of children, because as far as the world knew, she'd lost her son in that parking lot 28 years ago and never got him back. The detective's name was Angela Moreno, and she worked cold cases for the Cleveland Police Department. Rebecca made the introduction, and I met Detective Moreno at the station the next afternoon. I brought everything: the VHS tapes, the adoption papers my father had finally given me, the missing persons report, the screenshots, all of it. Detective Moreno was in her early 50s, with sharp eyes and the kind of careful demeanor that comes from years of hearing horrible stories and having to stay professional through all of them. She watched 3 of the tapes in silence, taking notes, occasionally pausing to zoom in on details. When she finished, she looked at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "These tapes are evidence of something," she said. "But I'm not sure what yet. The evaluations look legitimate. The facilities are real. I recognize that interview room from Metro Hospital. But how a missing child from Oregon ended up in Ohio Child Services under a false name is the question. Someone falsified documents. Someone created a new identity for you. That's federal. I need to make some calls." She made me go through my entire life story, everything I could remember. I told her about growing up in suburban Cleveland, about my quiet childhood, my parents who were loving but not particularly affectionate, the way they'd always been vague about extended family, about why we never visited relatives or had family reunions. I told her about the complete lack of baby photos, the way my mother would change the subject whenever I asked about being born, the weird gaps in our family history that I'd never questioned because kids don't question their reality. They just live in it. Detective Moreno wrote down everything, and when I finished, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you think your adoptive parents knew you were a missing child? That they were participating in kidnapping?" I wanted to say no. Wanted to defend the man who taught me to ride a bike and the woman who sat up with me when I had nightmares. But I couldn't. Because they'd hidden those tapes. They'd lied about my adoption. They'd never tried to find my biological family. They'd let me live 30 years without the truth. Detective Moreno brought in the FBI 2 days later. The agent's name was David Colton, attached to the Portland field office but currently working out of Cleveland on an unrelated case. Convenient timing. Agent Colton was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the kind of intensity that comes from people who are very good at their jobs. He interviewed me for 3 hours, going through everything again in excruciating detail. Every memory, every gap, every inconsistency in my childhood. He was particularly interested in the tapes and the adoption paperwork. My father had finally given me the full file, and it was suspicious from the start. The adoption was processed through a private agency that no longer existed. The paperwork was minimal, barely legal. There were signatures from officials whose names Agent Colton couldn't verify. The whole thing looked like it had been rushed through the system by someone who knew how to exploit loopholes. "Here's what I think happened," Agent Colton said, spreading documents across the conference room table. "You were taken from that parking lot in Portland by someone, we don't know who yet. That person brought you to Ohio and either abandoned you or handed you off to an intermediary. You ended up in emergency foster care, probably with a false name and false documents saying you were removed from a parent for neglect. The system was overwhelmed, understaffed, and you were a quiet, traumatized toddler who didn't talk much. No one questioned your identity too hard. You were placed in temporary care, and then someone, either within the system or connected to it, facilitated a quick private adoption to your adoptive parents. The evaluations on the tapes are legitimate post-trauma assessments, but everything else about your case was fabricated. Someone created Daniel Thorne to replace Ethan Reeves, and your adoptive parents either knew and didn't care, or they were told a story that made them feel justified in not asking questions." Agent Colton pulled out a photo, the same one Detective Moreno had shown me weeks ago. Catherine Reeves holding her son's hand, both of them smiling at the camera. "Your biological mother spent 15 years looking for you," he said quietly. "She never gave up. She ran a Facebook page, kept the case alive in local media, worked with private investigators. She died 6 months ago believing you were dead. She never knew you were alive and living 3 states away under a different name. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of this. But right now, we need to focus on who took you and how this happened, because if it happened to you, it might have happened to others. This could be part of a larger operation. We need to investigate your adoptive parents, the adoption agency, everyone involved. Are you willing to cooperate with that?" I was willing because what choice did I have? My entire life was already dismantled, scattered across this conference table in the form of police reports and missing persons files. Agent Colton got a warrant to search my father's house. They executed it on a cold morning in February, and I wasn't there. But my father called me afterward, his voice broken. "They took everything," he said. "All your mother's papers, her computer, boxes from the attic. Danny, I swear we didn't know. We were told you were from a troubled home, that your biological mother had abandoned you, that we were saving you. We never questioned it because we wanted you so badly. We'd been trying to have children for years. When they said there was a little boy who needed a home, we just said yes. We didn't ask enough questions. We should have asked more questions. God, Danny, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The investigation took 6 weeks, and what they found destroyed my father almost as thoroughly as it destroyed me. The adoption agency that processed my placement was a front for what Agent Colton called a gray market adoption ring that operated in the late 90s. They took children from vulnerable situations, sometimes legally removed kids, sometimes kidnapped children, and placed them with desperate couples willing to pay significant fees and not ask questions. My parents had paid $60,000 for me, which they'd described in their paperwork as agency fees and legal costs. That money went to people who were now either dead, in prison for other crimes, or disappeared. The woman who'd facilitated my adoption, the one whose signature was all over the paperwork, was named Patricia Vance. She'd died in 2003. The lawyer who'd processed the legal documents had his license revoked in 2005 for unrelated fraud. The trail was cold, except for one thing: physical evidence that I was who Agent Colton said I was. They did a DNA test, me and a sample from Catherine Reeves's medical records that her sister Janet agreed to release. The results took 3 weeks, and Agent Colton called me to his office to deliver them in person. Match. 99.9% probability that Catherine Ann Reeves was my biological mother, which meant I was Ethan Reeves, which meant I'd been stolen from a parking lot when I was 2.5 years old and sold to a couple in Ohio who either knew or should have known they were buying a kidnapped child. Agent Colton slid another document across the desk. Your biological aunt, Janet Reeves, wants to meet you, he said. She lives in Portland. She's willing to come here, or you can go there. She has photos, videos, medical records, everything about your first 2 years of life. She says your mother never stopped looking for you. Even when she was dying, she was still working with investigators. Janet wants you to know that. She wants you to know you were loved. I flew to Portland in March, exactly 28 years after I was taken. Janet Reeves picked me up at the airport, and I knew her face the second I saw her. She looked like the young woman in those photos, the one holding the toddler with the strawberry birthmark. She looked like me. We had the same eyes, the same mouth, the same way of standing with our weight slightly on our left foot. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled me into a hug in the middle of the arrivals area, and I felt something crack open in my chest that I hadn't known was closed. You look so much like her, Janet said, pulling back to look at my face. Like Kathy. You have her expressions. God, Ethan. We thought you were gone. We thought someone had killed you and hidden your body. We never imagined this. Never imagined you were alive and just living a different life. She took me to her house, a small craftsman in Northeast Portland, and showed me everything. Photo albums from my first 2 years of life, me as an infant, me learning to walk, me at the beach, me playing with toy trucks. Videos of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and everyday moments that looked nothing like the tapes I'd found in my basement. These showed a happy, engaged toddler with a mother who clearly adored him. Mrs. Ethan, the child I'd been before someone took me. Janet also showed me the missing persons file Catherine had kept, a thick binder full of police reports, private investigator notes, and printed copies of social media posts. Catherine had posted about me every year on my birthday, had run age progression photos, had never stopped hoping someone would recognize me and bring me home. She blamed herself, Janet said quietly. She turned her back for 2 minutes to put groceries in the car. That's all it took. 2 minutes. Someone grabbed you out of the cart and disappeared. Security footage showed a woman approaching the cart, then static. The cameras had a blind spot. By the time Kathy realized you were gone and ran back into the store, you were just gone. Janet told me everything she knew about my biological mother. Catherine had been 24 when I was born, working as a nurse, single but happy. She'd gotten pregnant by accident with a boyfriend who'd left when he found out, but she'd been determined to raise me alone. By all accounts, she'd been a good mother. Loving, attentive, stable. Nothing like the story my adoptive parents had been told about a troubled addict who'd abandoned her child. That was all lies, fabricated to make my adoptive parents feel righteous about taking me, to make them ask fewer questions. Catherine had spent years trying to get the police to expand their investigation, convinced I'd been taken for adoption fraud, but without evidence, they'd had nowhere to go. The case had gone cold. Catherine had eventually moved on with her life, remarried briefly, divorced, focused on her nursing career. But she'd never stopped looking. Even on her deathbed, Janet said. She'd been talking about me, wondering where I was, hoping I was safe. The guilt of that nearly broke me. Not my guilt, but the crushing weight of knowing my mother had died without closure, without knowing I'd been alive the whole time just 3 states away. If I'd found those tapes a year earlier, if I'd questioned my adoption sooner, if my adoptive mother had lived long enough for me to confront her, if. The ifs could drive you insane. Agent Colton had warned me about this, about survivor guilt and trauma processing. He'd recommended a therapist who specialized in recovered missing persons, and I'd started seeing her twice a week. Dr. Lisa Chen. 40 years of experience working with people who'd discovered massive deceptions about their identities. She told me that the grief and rage and confusion were all normal, that I was essentially mourning one version of myself while trying to integrate another, that it would take time to figure out who I was now that I knew who I'd been. Ethan or Daniel. Reeves or Thorne. Both. Neither. Someone new entirely. The legal consequences came down in April. The FBI had built a case against the adoption ring that had operated in the late 90s, and while most of the main players were beyond prosecution, they'd identified 12 other cases similar to mine. children who'd been taken from vulnerable situations or outright kidnapped and placed with families through fraudulent means. Some of those children were adults now, like me, living normal lives with no idea. Others had been recovered years ago and reunited with their biological families. The FBI was reaching out to all of them, opening old wounds, rewriting histories. As for my adoptive father, Robert Thorne, the FBI decided not to charge him. Agent Colton said there wasn't enough evidence that he'd known I was kidnapped. The paperwork had been convincing enough, the story plausible enough, and he genuinely believed he was adopting a child removed from an unfit mother. Ignorance wasn't innocence, but it also wasn't criminal intent. He'd been a victim too, in a way. Just a different kind. I met with my father one last time in May. We sat in his mostly empty house, surrounded by packed boxes and the ghosts of 30 years of lies. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, diminished somehow, like the truth had physically shrunk him. "I loved you," he said. "I need you to know that. Whatever else was wrong, whatever we should have done differently, I loved you like you were mine. You were my son. Are my son. I don't know if that means anything to you anymore, but it's true." I told him I believed him, because I did. I could hold two truths at once, that he'd loved me, and that his love had been built on a foundation of theft and lies, that he'd been a good father in many ways, and that he'd failed me in the most fundamental way possible by not asking the right questions when it mattered. I told him I needed time, that I didn't know what our relationship would look like going forward, that I had a whole other family now, a biological aunt and cousins I'd never met, a history I needed to understand. He nodded, tears running down his face, and said he understood, that he'd wait, that he hoped someday I could forgive him. I legally changed my name back to Ethan Reeves in June. It was surprisingly simple, just paperwork and a court date. The judge was kind about it, said she'd handled cases like mine before, adoptees reclaiming their original identities. She signed the order without questions, and just like that, Daniel Thorne ceased to exist. I was Ethan Reeves again, or for the first time, depending on how you looked at it. I got a new driver's license, new social security card, new credit cards, changed my name at work, which required an HR meeting and explanations I'd rather not have given but had to. My boss was understanding, called it a family situation, and left it at that. My coworkers were curious but polite enough not to push. I lost a few friends over it, people who couldn't handle the weirdness of the situation or who sided with my adoptive father. But I gained others. Janet introduced me to my extended biological family, cousins and second cousins and family friends who remembered the little boy who'd disappeared. They welcomed me back like I'd never been gone, even though I couldn't remember any of them. The hardest part was the memories, or lack of them. I'd hoped that learning the truth might unlock something in my brain, might make me remember those first 2 years with Catherine. But nothing came. My earliest clear memories still started around age 5, after the adoption was finalized, after I'd become Daniel. Everything before that was blank, or worse, confused with false memories I couldn't trust. Did I really remember learning to swim at age 6? Or had I been told about it so many times I'd created a memory from the story? Did I really remember my mother's, Linda's, perfume? Or was that just what I wanted to remember? Dr. Chen said this was normal for early childhood trauma. The brain protects itself by suppressing memories that are too painful or confusing. I might never remember being Ethan the toddler, might never remember Catherine, might never remember being taken. Part of me was grateful for that. Part of me felt robbed all over again. I scattered Catherine's ashes in September, on what would have been her 52nd birthday. Janet had kept them at her house, waiting for the right moment, the right reason. She said having me there, having Ethan back, made it feel right to let go. We drove out to the coast, to a beach Catherine had loved, and we walked to the edge of the water and released her into the Pacific. Janet said some words about love and loss and the cruelty of time. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. Just stood there watching the ashes dissolve into the surf and thought about the woman I'd never known who'd spent 15 years looking for me, who'd died thinking I was dead, or worse, who'd never gotten to see me grow up, never got to know the man I'd become. I thought about the parallel universe where none of this happened, where Catherine didn't turn her back for those 2 minutes, where I grew up as Ethan Reeves in Portland, Oregon, with a mother who loved me. What would that person have been like? Would he have been happier? Would he have been me? The truth is, I don't know who I am anymore. Not Daniel, not fully Ethan, just someone in between trying to build a coherent identity from fragments. I'm 30 years old with a fractured childhood and 2 families, one that raised me on lies and one that lost me to theft. I have a job I'm still good at, coworkers who call me Ethan now without stumbling over it, an apartment full of furniture I bought as Daniel but live in as Ethan. I see Janet twice a month. Either I fly to Portland or she comes here. We're building something that feels like family, slowly, carefully. I haven't spoken to Robert Thorne since that meeting in May. He sends emails sometimes that I don't answer. Maybe someday I will. Maybe someday the anger will fade enough that I can separate the man who raised me from the crime that brought me to him. But not yet. The FBI closed the investigation in November. They'd done everything they could, identified as many victims as possible, brought what closure they could to cases that were decades cold. Agent Colton called to tell me personally, said he wished things had been different, that I'd been found sooner, that Catherine had lived to see me come home. But the system had failed. The bad actors were mostly beyond justice, and all we could do now was move forward. He said I could call him any time if I had questions or needed help navigating the legal aftermath. He said I was handling this better than most people would, that I should be proud of how I was coping. I didn't feel proud. I felt hollowed out and reconstructed from spare parts, a patchwork person trying to pass as whole. But I thanked him anyway because he'd been kind, because he'd done his job well, because what else was there to say? I still have the VHS tapes. They're in a box in my closet, along with the adoption papers and the missing persons reports and all the other evidence of my stolen life. I've only watched them once since that first afternoon in my father's house, one night when I couldn't sleep and needed to see that small, traumatized child again, needed to understand what those adults saw when they looked at him. Did they see a victim? A case number? A child worth saving? Or just processing through the system? The boy on the tapes still doesn't look like me. He looks like someone I might have been, in another life, before everything went wrong. Sometimes I think about that child and wonder if he's still in there somewhere, buried under 30 years of being someone else. If the real Ethan Reeves is waiting to emerge, or if he died in that parking lot and I'm just what grew up in his place. A stranger wearing his name. I don't have a neat ending to this story. No moment of triumphant healing, no dramatic reconciliation, no perfect closure. Just life, moving forward in its messy way, pulling me along whether I'm ready or not. I wake up each morning as Ethan Reeves, brush my teeth, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. On good days, it feels like progress. On bad days, it feels like forgetting all over again. Janet says Catherine would be happy I'm alive, that the details don't matter, that knowing I survived would have been enough for her. I want to believe that. Want to believe that somewhere, somehow, she knows. That she's not just ashes in the Pacific, but something more. Something that can see me now and know I made it through. That I'm okay, or at least getting there. That the 30 years weren't wasted, weren't nothing. That I'm still here, still fighting, still learning how to be the person I was always supposed to be before someone decided otherwise. The birthmark is still on my left wrist, that strawberry-shaped mark that proved I was Ethan Reeves. Sometimes I stare at it and think about how something so small held the answer all along. If anyone had noticed, if anyone had connected the dots, if the system had worked the way it was supposed to. But systems fail, and people lie, and children disappear, and sometimes they don't come back for 30 years. Sometimes they come back different, carrying the weight of 2 lifetimes and trying to figure out which one is real. I'm 30 years old. I was kidnapped as a toddler and raised under a false identity by people who either knew or should have known they were participating in a crime. My biological mother died without ever knowing I survived. My adoptive parents are gone or estranged. I have family. I'm just learning to know. Memories I'll never recover, and a name I'm still learning to answer to. It's not the life I thought I had. It's not even close. But it's mine. The real one. Finally. And I'm still here. I'm still here. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.